This is Mark Minton.
And Yvonne Droms.
And we're going to talk about cave exploration, the last frontier. And the reason we call it the last frontier is because it's one of the last places on Earth where you can actually do geographic exploration, go places that no one has been before. Because of the nature of caves, which are underground, you can't really tell what's there without going inside to look. You can't fly over it. You can't look at it with satellite. You can't look at it with Google Earth. The only way to know what's in a cave is to go inside and find out. Caves exist in karst terrain. Karst is characterized by sinkholes, of which this is an example. You can see there's a little stream bed that goes into this sinkhole, but it doesn't come out the other side. That's because the water goes into a cave. Sometimes karst terrain is pretty extreme. These are called mogotes, and it's basically like an egg crate, hills and sinkholes. There's sometimes very solutioned bedrock showing on the surface. There's a person in the upper left corner. It's like little mountain ranges, but it's bare limestone carved by water. Karst exists all over the world and all over the US. As you can see, there's karst in almost every state, so it shouldn't be too far for anybody to go to a cave if you know where they are. In tropical areas, karst gets really extreme.
You can see that some of these pyres are up to 300 feet tall, and there's like these trees that are growing amongst them.
So the best way to get involved with caving is to contact the NSS, National Speleological Society. They have local organizations in most states, and those people can show you how to go caving, where caves are, and how to do it safely. So caves are sometimes in remote and interesting places, so just getting to a cave can be an adventure. This is a little road in Mexico, which is carved right out of the side of a cliff.
It can be a problem when you encounter traffic on those roads. There's a big drop off on the other side, and it's very difficult to pass.
Sometimes there are no roads at all, and we make our own. That usually works, but not always. Even the trail to a cave can be a challenge. This is in Puerto Rico. Normally that's just a dry trail through the jungle, but after a big rain, it became a lake. And sometimes we need a lot of equipment to explore caves. In this case, Yvonne's got 600 feet of rope over her shoulder, which we'll use to go down a vertical cave. We'll see more about that in a minute. And in foreign countries, sometimes we have to deal with local customs that are very different than our own. In this particular case, we're in southern Mexico, and the local people have a lot of beliefs about caves, and we're going through a purification ceremony so that we get right with the cave gods before we go in. This is a typical cave entrance. It's a small hole at the base of a cliff, although cave entrances come in all different shapes and sizes. Sometimes we put doors or lids or gates on caves to keep out people, children, animals, whatever, or to regulate the airflow in the cave. This is a vertical cave entrance. It was drilled into a cave so that we had better access than we would have from the natural entrance. This is an enormous cave entrance in Mexico. You can see there's two little people up there at the top near the cave entrance, actually three. It's about 120 feet above the creek bed where I'm standing at the bottom. This is a view out of a different cave on a cliff face. You can see you get some pretty spectacular views from caves that are up high. This is a cave in southern Mexico, which is about a 250-foot deep sinkhole covered with jungle that goes down into an enormous cave entrance. It's very spectacular. This is what it looks like from the inside looking back out. This is a cave entrance in Mexico that we explored, and you may not be able to tell, but there's a person in this picture. That's right there, that's me, 6 feet tall. Sometimes the sun shines into a cave, and it's very spectacular when that happens. It usually only happens at a certain time of year for a very short period of time. This is in West Virginia. This is another one in Mexico.
Well, the sun shines only for a certain amount of time, about an hour a day, and only at certain times of the year.
Sometimes cave entrances are so large that daylight penetrates way back into the cave. This is several hundred feet inside of a cave in Mexico. Probably the thing that people know about caves the most are formations, stalagmites, stalactites, flowstone. This is an example in West Virginia. This is a cave passage that no one knew about. We discovered this cave and the formations in it. This is another formation in a cave we found in Puerto Rico. Notice there's a person down on the lower left. This is a big one, kind of like in Carlsbad. Sometimes there are a lot of formations. In this case, they're in a vertical area where we have to be on rope, but we still have to go around and past formations. This is an unusual formation that has little cups full of water on the sides.
It's called a Splatter Mite. The cups are formed by splashing of water from the ceiling.
This is in West Virginia. Sometimes the formations are highly colored. These are also in West Virginia, stained by minerals in the water, probably iron. And sometimes the formations go crazy directions, all different ways, up and down, sideways.
They're called helictites.
These are gypsum flowers. Most formations are formed from calcite, which is basically dissolved limestone that is recrystallized in the cave. But this is gypsum, which is a different mineral, and it squeezes through little cracks in the rock and comes out in curlicues. This is another unusual formation called cave pearls. They're also made of calcite, but they're not attached. They just roll around in a little cup of water like marbles. And I don't know what that is.
We called it the Medusa.
You get to see some really interesting things in caves. This is another strange formation coming out of a hole in the ceiling, like a big mouth. These are Rimstone Dams. This is a fairly common sort of formation you see in commercial caves. They're little ridges of calcite that hold back a pond of water, and sometimes they cascade down from one to the other for a long way. They're very beautiful. Some formations are not even caused by deposition. This is a drip circle, which is a fairly rare formation where water dripping down splashes and washes away the sand in a perfect circle around the middle of the drip. This is also in West Virginia. This is a talon of bedrock left behind when the cave passage was formed. Caves are formed by acidic water which seeps through cracks in the ground and very slowly dissolves the limestone. Limestone's unusual in that respect because it can be dissolved by acidic water. Most rock can't. You wouldn't find this in a granite cave. This is a natural bridge, another fairly unusual thing in a cave, where the cave passage washed out or dissolved out both above and below, but left a little piece of bedrock in the middle. Sometimes you get some neat shapes. This cave is sort of pentagonal. And sometimes they're very highly sculpted. This is a cave in Puerto Rico where the water has been rushing through there, carving out little pockets and blades and so forth.
The carved rock is very sharp, and so it's very difficult to walk on top, but it's also very difficult to walk in the water, as you can see.
Sometimes cave passages are really big. There are 3 people in here, and this is probably 200 or 300 feet from the front of the slide to the back. This is in West Virginia. This is another passage that we discovered when we were exploring this cave. Very nice, big walking passage with a lot of stalactites and stalagmites. Sometimes we find nice rooms, such as this one. This has breakdown, which are big blocks of rock that fell off the ceiling. Plus it has some flowstone. You can see some formations hanging down in the middle. Sometimes you have to decide, which way am I going to go? I'd probably go to the right. This is what cavers typically look like when they're in a cave. We wear a helmet. It does 2 things. It protects your head when you get in a low ceilinged area, and it also holds up your light. You'll notice that we're using both hands to balance ourselves, so you really couldn't just carry a flashlight in your hand. Besides, you might drop it down a hole and then you'd be in trouble. In the pack, we have spare batteries, spare lights, warm clothing, food, water, whatever we need. There's very little resources in a cave, and it's completely dark. As soon as you're away from the entrance, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. You would never be able to get out of a cave if you ran out of light. So it's very, very important to have plenty of light and backups in case you break one or lose one. Not all cave passages are big. Sometimes we have to squeeze through small spaces. But we check everything. We look under the wall. We crawl in the water. Caves are like natural storm sewers. The water that seeps down through the earth flows through the caves, eventually comes out as a spring, but sometimes there's still water in the passages, and here you can see that you have to get pretty close to it. Sometimes it's not big enough at all, and we dig to get through. We even check out the ceiling. You never know, it might go up there. And it can be really small and jagged. But we still look everywhere, and sometimes we get lucky. When we came out from under this ledge,
This is what you can find when you emerge from your tiny crawl.
you got to be sure you look back, though, because it's easy to come out of a little hole like that, run down the big passage, and then turn around and go, uh-oh, how did I get here?
Where's the way out?
Big passages are nice, too. Also easy to get lost in there, surprisingly, because it's so big and there's so many rocks. If you came out from behind one of those rocks, how would you find out which one it was?
Yeah.
This is a cave in West Virginia that has an enormous train tunnel sized passage.
There's a person hanging on rope in the middle of the picture. It's you can barely see the rope.
This was a cave that was known for a long time, and the passage in the ceiling wasn't known until we climbed up the wall and found out that there's another level above this big passage. This is a cave in Mexico with a huge room about 2,000 feet below the surface.
This room is 600 feet long, and you can barely see the person way far away at the end of the picture there.
There's about 4 people in this picture. Sometimes caves are full of water. Here's one in Virginia where we have to wade through the water. You can see the steam coming off. More wading, same cave. Caves are generally about the same temperature all year long, and they are usually the temperature which is average for that area. So for us in Virginia and West Virginia, that's in the low 50s. So we usually dress reasonably warmly. Sometimes you'll see pictures of people in Mexico or in the West wearing t-shirts and shorts because the caves there are much warmer.
We sometimes carry a waterproof tub in our cave packs so the pack will float. Otherwise, it would drag us down into the water.
This is in southern Mexico, and you can see that it's very highly polished. You would not want to be here in the rainy season. This is the dry season. It's the only time it's safe to explore here. Sometimes the ceiling gets pretty low, but we go through anyway. Sometimes you have to find your way. There's formations that hang down even in the water, and sometimes we have to swim around between formations to find the way on. And it can get really low. In fact, sometimes it gets so low you can't get through at all. Other times the water is very fast moving, and it's dangerous because it can actually sweep you off your feet. In this case, we don't need those ropes because it's vertical. We need them so that we can actually hold on and not get flushed away. There's about a 50-foot drop just out of sight in this picture. So if we were to fall and get swept away in the water, we would go over a waterfall. Here's another place where you wouldn't want to be in the water. So we rig a rope across the passage and do what's called a Tyrolean. Caving is really exciting. We do some vertical work. We use ropes. We go up domes in the ceiling, down pits, and across sheer faces to find more cave passage. Here's an example of someone coming out of a shaft in the ceiling that intersects a very large passage. We actually found this from the bottom, but we climbed up into the ceiling and climbed up through that hole to see where it went.
When you look up a dome, you never know if you're going to find passage at the top. For example, here, you just have to bold climb up to it to see if there's passage. That makes it really exciting.
You can see that this person is climbing up. You can see their rope and attachments to the wall. And we did find a passage at the top. In fact, what we found was another dome. So we're in the process of climbing that one, but we haven't gotten to the top yet. This is a really large drop in a cave in Mexico.
It's about 250 foot tall. And you can see tiny people all over this picture, at the bottom especially.
This is a really spectacular drop because you're far away from the walls. So when you come down on that rope, you're just like a little spider coming off the ceiling. Some caves are too big to explore in one trip in from the entrance and back out in the same day. So sometimes we camp in the cave. We take in sleeping bags and foam pads and camp stoves, just like you would on a mountain backpacking expedition. And from the camp, we explore even more cave passage and we come back to the camp. This is all stuff in West Virginia that we found from that very cave camp. Sometimes we find nice big rooms. This one's about 80 feet high. Big river passage. This is in Puerto Rico. Sometimes it's tall and narrow, little canyon with the water in the floor. This is in West Virginia, similar sort of passage. You can stay out of the water sometimes by walking on the edges, and you notice that the ceiling is black. And you might wonder what's up there. This is what's up there. It's spectacular. This passage is over 100 feet tall. The old part of the cave is up high, it's dry, but down below there's still active water. So some more passage in the same cave.
You can see how pristine this cave is, this passage. You see one set of footprints on the floor. This was taken during original exploration.
This is a cave in Virginia. Sometimes the passage is in the ceiling rather than down at the floor. This is a picture in West Virginia of a little canyon snaking across the ceiling of a passage. Waterfalls underground.
There's a person on the right there that is kind of hidden.
You can see the striping in the walls. That's bands of different kinds of rock. It's very beautiful when it's all clean and polished. Sometimes caves get pretty technical. This is an example of a vertical section of cave where we have ropes to go straight up and down. You can see two people in here, and each one is on a rope that goes down a separate pit, but they're so close together that they're actually tied from one to the next. So you just get off of one rope and on to the next. This is a example of some geology. Since caves are developed in the bedrock, it's the best way to see geology from the inside out.
This is an example of a fold.
Sometimes folding is really extreme. You can wonder what kind of heat and pressure does it take to fold limestone like that? This is an example of a fault where the rock has separated along a slickenside fault plane. And this is an example of a contact between two different layers of rock. You can see that the upper rock is dark and the lower rock is light colored, white.
And you can see that the rock flipped upside down when it fell.
That's pretty cool. Another thing you get to see in caves are fossils. This is in West Virginia, a nautiloid. And some really strange fossils. I'm not really sure what that is. And sometimes we find bones.
The bones are actually embedded in the rock.
These are dugong bones in a cave in Puerto Rico. This is another sort of bone that we find in caves, things that have fallen in or washed in and died in the cave and became buried. In this particular case, this is in southern Mexico, and it's an example of a kind of sloth that was not known from this area until we found it a few years ago. This is a paleontologist from Mexico who's working in the cave to excavate the bones and identify them. Another thing we do, as mentioned in the video, is dye traces. When we have water in a cave, but we can't follow it, we wonder where it goes, and we put in non-toxic dye and then see where we can find that dye.
We look for the dye in streams and other passages, or at springs on the surface to learn where it goes.
There are a lot of disciplines that you can explore in caving: biology and geology, paleontology, archaeology, and so forth. When the water is completely filling the cave passage, some people use scuba gear to dive through it. This is a particularly technical and somewhat dangerous aspect of caving that not very many people do, and no one should ever try this without adequate training. But caves keep going even if they're full of water. You also sometimes find interesting life in caves.
That's a baby vulture.
Vultures, of course, don't live very far into a cave because there's no light, but they do use cave entrances. This is another scary looking critter.
It's called an amblypidgid, but it's harmless. Fierce though.
This is a millipede. It's totally white. I think there was an example of something like this in the video. It's white because if you live in the dark, you don't need any color. This is a blind fish, a white fish and a white crayfish, and they have no eyes. Not only do they have no color, they have no eyes because, again, in total darkness, it wouldn't do you any good. Bats are probably the critter that most people associate with caves. And there are lots of kinds of bats all over the world. These are some rare bats that live in West Virginia. And since they're an endangered species, we go in every few years to count them to monitor the health of the colony. These are Virginia big ear bats. Sometimes you meet weird critters in caves, like this crab in Puerto Rico. What are you doing in my cave? Or how about a boa constrictor? This boa constrictor was way back in the dark zone and eats bats. Salamanders. This is actually not a cave adapted salamander. It has eyes and color, but you find them in caves way back inside. One of the things we do in caves is survey them. We make maps. This is a person measuring the distance from one part of a cave to another. And we have to read a compass and a clinometer to get a three-dimensional idea of what the cave passage is like. And we write it all down.
We make maps to document the cave, to find our way, and to predict where we might find more passage.
When you're in a cave, you really can't tell where you are relative to the surface or even where you are relative to other passageways. But the map helps you figure out if you might get from one place to another. Nowadays, we use an electronic device. You can't really see it, but in between the two people in back is a small distance meter that measures everything with one click of a button. So we no longer need the tape measure. And this is an example of a cave map. This is a simple one, but it's like a road map. It shows where the entrance is. It shows major features like big boulders and formations and how the ceiling changes and how the floor changes. This is a very complicated cave map. It's so complicated that you can't really see it all in one flat image. That's why there's so many little side images and cross sections and so forth to show the complexity of the cave. And when they are complex like that, we use cross sections like this, which show you a vertical slice through the earth, how the cave developed.
You can see the little trees, that's the surface on top.
So there are a lot of vertical drops here. One connects to the next. So like I said, if you're interested in caves, get in touch with the National Speleological Society. They can tell you where there are caves in your state or your city. And those organizations can help you get ready to go caving and teach you how to do it safely. So lots of people's pictures were involved here. We didn't take all or even most of them. So I thank these people for their images. And if you have any questions, we may or may not have time to answer any questions right now, but you could also email us. Thank you.